Hey, it's Conrad Thompson. Thanks for checking out the podcast here on YouTube. Be sure to hit the subscribe button and the notifications bell. You'll get a notice anytime we upload some new content. And when I'm not asking Bruce, hey, how big was Batista's? Well, you know. One of the things I like to do is help people save money. And if you're watching this video right now and you're in a 30-year loan, man, you're overpaying your single biggest bill and you may not even realize it. I want you to do a little experiment for me. Take your calculator out, multiply your monthly house payment by 360 payments. That's how many payments there are in a 30-year loan. That big scary number, that's your total of payments. You're looking at that number? You know you can do better. Keep more of your own money right now and go to savewithconrad.com. Or maybe you've got credit card debt. Man, it's not a matter of if I can save you money with that. Your average interest rate on a credit card is more than 20%. And by the way, all the interest you pay on those credit cards, it's not tax deductible. Whereas the mortgage interest, well, that is tax deductible. So if you owe this debt, it's up to you how to pay it back. Doesn't it make sense to get the cheapest rate possible and the greatest tax deduction possible? Find out how much money you can save right now for free at savewithconrad.com. You don't need perfect credit. Even scores in the 500s can be approved, and it's no cost out of pocket. But maybe best of all, we're licensed in more than 40 states. We can help more families than ever before. But how much can we save you? Find out right now for free with a quick quote from savewithconrad.com. Hey, it's Conrad Thompson, and you're listening to Arn. And of course, we couldn't do it without the founder of the Four Horsemen, the Hall of Famer himself, AA, Arn Anderson. Arn, how are you, man?
Enjoying this crisp, cool fall air. How about you?
Same. I got to tell you, I was ready for a few more weeks of summer, but it's not in the cards. It's kind of cold today here in Huntsville, so I'll make it work. You know, listen, I guess we should acknowledge we got friends listening in Minnesota, and up there, they're about to get so cold that if you just take your hot water right out of your coffee maker and throw it in the air, it just evaporates. That's not going to happen for us down here in the Carolinas and Alabama.
Well, there's no such thing as fall in Minnesota.
Yeah.
I too have friends, Barry Darso and Teresa, that live up there, and it literally goes from summer to 10 degrees.
Well, we're excited to give you the heat today, all the degrees from Survivor Series 2010. That's our topic today. Next week, we'll be back at you with another hashtag Ask Arn Anything. 2010 is an interesting year for the company. It feels like a company trying to find its identity, at least to me. But we've got some promising stuff that is going to look a lot different just 10 years later. The Survivor Series 2010 edition was both a Raw and a SmackDown branded pay-per-view. So we've got both brands here. It went down on November 21st. It's at the American Airlines Arena in Miami. There's 8,000 being as reported and being in attendance. But of course, Meltzer says that well under that number actually paid. That's a big arena, man. I think you can seat like 15,000 folks in there. So when you're running a big event like Survivor Series to half a house, that's got to be kind of discouraging.
Yeah, it's a funny thing. You would think that each individual pay-per-view would have its own identity and do a set amount of buys and all this. But when you start running so many, then it starts to become with, okay, how many personal issues do you have on the match? And, you know, things that are going on Raw and SmackDown, what's your storyline and all that. It's not like you can just brand a particular, like Survivor Series. I remember once upon a time, it was the Thanksgiving show for WWF, and you knew what you were getting. You were getting the Survivor Series, which is the name of the show, style matches, and that's what was featured. But you got more of a blend of some different stories going on at this particular time, and I think they're kind of changing the face of what Survivor Series actually is. Only one Survivor Series style match will tell you that, I think.
Let's talk about something Meltzer wrote. He says all the Florida crowds the past week were disappointments. He says, it was one of the few times in history where at ringside in front of the hard camera, you saw empty seats all night. And he says that some in the company are attributing the disappointing crowd that NASCAR was in the same market. And he says others simply laughed at that suggestion. This is an old sort of, I don't know, a bit of a cliche. You know, has forever said on Something to Wrestle that one of the old timer excuses was, oh, they opened that new all night gas station. And I think one of the quotes attributed to Tracy Smothers recently when he passed away was, man, McDonald's is open. You can't compete with that. This is just old school wrestling stuff. Oh, it's not us. It's this other nominal thing happening across town. Right.
Yeah. If they want to see it, it doesn't matter if the circus is in the same building. They'll see it.
Yeah. I agree. I've never heard that circus in the same building. And some of these events, it looks like the circus was, this Survivor Series has 244,000 buys on pay-per-view. That is actually up from 2009. It sold 225,000. But the previous year was in the 300,000. So we're certainly on a bit of a decline. This was the 24th Survivor Series, and the poster for this event had Wade Barrett of Nexus on there. It's kind of crazy to think that, you know, he's on the poster for one of the biggest tentpole events of the year. And as you like to say, we've already cut his water off.
Yeah. And the thing about it is, it didn't have to be that way. Nexus had the numbers. They had the young lions, which is a bit of a cliche, all grouped together, pulling in one direction. And the numbers they had, you know, you could have ran with those guys just getting heat week after week after week, and the numbers being what was causing it. And you can't half-ass it, though. It's one of those situations where John Cena was a guy that was stuck in the middle and under the gun and all that. Well, those guys should have prevailed every single week over the guys they were singling out, the Randy Ortons of the world, the John Cenas of the world. And, you know, even up to the Undertaker, when you got 8 guys, you know, you could do a lot of damage. And I think when you know, put just Wade out there, why wouldn't all of Nexus been on that poster?
Yeah. Well, I mean, I guess they thought at this point Wade Barrett was going to be the guy. And of course, we know what happened at SummerSlam. We should remind everybody that there were stakes at Hell in a Cell, and we've talked about that. John Cena had to join Nexus. The Nexus leader, Wade Barrett, here is going to be, at least on Raw, the main feud is going to be Wade Barrett taking on Randy Orton for his WWE Championship. John Cena is going to be the special guest referee. And remember, he's part of Nexus. You can imagine what happens there. And on the November 8th episode of Raw, the general manager makes a stipulation that this match here can only be won by pinfall or submission. And in addition to that, the other members of Nexus are banned from ringside. So the concept here is, if Barrett doesn't win the title, then he would have Cena fired. So that's sort of his incentive, I guess, to not screw Wade Barrett around. And in addition to that, if Barrett does win the title, Barrett is going to relieve John Cena from his obligation to Nexus. So it feels like the fix is in. This might finally be Nexus's night. The main rivalry from SmackDown is the World Heavyweight Champion Kane against Edge. And, of course, the world title is on the line. And after defeating his brother, The Undertaker, at bragging rights after a 3-month war, Alberto Del Rio, Rey Mysterio, and Edge all interfered in Kane's funeral for The Undertaker. And afterwards, all three competed in a match against each other for a number 1 contender spot. And at the end of the match, of course, Edge comes out victorious. And now we've got a firm collision course set with Kane and Edge. What'd you think of Kane's run here in 2010 as a top guy? You know, he first won the title, 12 years prior to that, back in 98. It just feels like he's been a part of the company since they turned the lights on. I mean, we know that's not true, but what a long run. And then to pop back up into the title picture shows that Vince has a lot of confidence in you, right?
Well, he's a player. He always was a player. And the one thing I did agree with, if you gave Kane that one title run and he pretty much overcame all the odds several times, not just one, not a one trick pony, but established himself not only as a top guy, but a monster and a champion that could defend the championship against virtually anybody in the company and prevail. That's who he was. And being a big fan of the character and a big fan of Glenn Jacobs, I was glad that he finally got his due and was featured in that role.
Let's talk about a new round of cuts. The company is going to release quite a few folks on the 19th, but some of these are even folks on the writing team. And perhaps the biggest name is Chris DeJoseph. We saw him on TV briefly as Big Dick Johnson. He had spent many years with the company and lately in this era, had been Michael Hayes' chief assistant on the SmackDown writing team. He even popped back up, I think in 2020 for the company. But he's been a staple in wrestling for a long time. I think a lot of fans saw him as a Big Dick, but they didn't know anything about him behind the scenes. What do you remember about Chris DeJoseph?
I remember that if you've seen him run down at the end of the night in a lime green G-string only, oiled up, you can never unsee it. It is one of the funniest. And I know that it was one of the things Vince enjoyed more than anything. At the end of the night, off the air, you want to give the audience something to talk about going home. He would hit the music and down would come Big Dick Johnson. And Vince would be rolling, as we all would be rolling. And that was just the entertainment at the end of the night. And he was a good sport about it. He knew what was going on, and it was entertaining.
It was entertaining. And Meltzer is going to make a little note in the Observer saying that it's been noted to him that Chris DeJoseph's dismissal has been interpreted as a warning shot by some to Michael Hayes, since the two were close. I don't know that I would even co-sign that. I maybe I'm misreading the tea leaves, as they say, but it felt like Michael Hayes has been on the inner circle forever, certainly with Vince and Stephanie and Triple H. Did you at all get an inclination that, oh man, if they're getting rid of DeJoseph, they might be pissed at Hayes because that was his boy?
One has nothing to do with the other.
Yeah.
Rest assured, Michael Hayes has been there since the beginning of time. He will continue to be there. And Big Dick Johnson had absolutely nothing to do with it, one way or the other.
That's a little weird to me. Let's talk about some other releases. These are television characters, by the way. Luke Gallows, he's going to be cut loose. Shad Gaspard, Jillian Fletcher, Taryn Terrell, Lance Hoyt, Chris Pavone, and all of them are told there's just budget cuts. But Gallows, we know, is going to go on to become a pretty big deal. He's going to have quite a run in New Japan, have a run with Impact, and then, of course, sign for big money to come back to the WWE. And these days he's on Impact, part of the Good Brothers with his pal Carl Anderson. I think his wife at the time was Taryn Terrell. She's also a part of this released group, but the other.
Wait a minute. You're talking about Gallows?
Yeah.
Nope. Taryn Terrell was actually.
Oh, that's Drew Galloway's. Yeah.
Drew's wife.
Yeah. My apologies. Correct.
You're very seldom ever incorrect on something like that. Thought I would just,
I'm glad you did. Here's what happened
out there.
I saw Gallows and Galloway and, got my wires crossed. So thank you for the correction.
It's an honest mistake. You don't make many of those.
Let's talk about her though. She was briefly suspended before eventually being released. I guess there was an incident back in August. She was arrested on a domestic dispute charge at a Los Angeles hotel. And, apparently she got loud. Hotel security was called. The police came. Ultimately the charges were dropped. But apparently she had heat with the office, not only because she got arrested, but because she didn't tell the office. And I think that this was the issue with the whole, and I don't know, I mean, you've never spent much time talking about it. I think this was the heat with the Enzo situation, several years later, where he had a situation and ultimately the charges would be dropped. But the issue wasn't necessarily that he was arrested. Obviously that's not good. but that he didn't communicate it to the office so they could have planned a defense or gotten out in front of it or protected themselves somehow. Is that the crux of the issue with Terrell here and perhaps Enzo, that they just didn't tell the office?
Yeah. One train of thought would be what happens on your personal time is in your personal life. The reality is you're much better off if you do have an incident of any kind. Let the office be the first one to know. So whatever damage control, now it's in their lap. They can do whatever they feel is necessary. You're better to go ahead and just transfer it to them. What do you want me to do about it? How do you want me to handle it? If I'm the person that's the subject of what's going on, if you try to just think it's going to go away, that's Fantasy Island. It's like something happens to someone in the business, give it one day and it's everywhere. So I think that was a mistake. I think the thing with Taryn involved Drew McIntyre and the two of them. It started off as innocently as going to the Playboy Mansion. I think it's where the party started that night. And it spilled back to the hotel, and I guess things, couples, and probably not a good idea to stay at the company hotel if you're a couple and you have tendency to get loud with each other, which I think is really all that happened. Is just they got into a big loud screaming fight and intoxicated, which everybody's probably done 1,000 times. Just so happened the police got called. It was the company hotel, and it became a lot bigger than I think it really was.
Well, ultimately, that relationship would end. They would divorce the next year, and well, things are going to look up for Drew Galloway. We know him these days as Drew McIntyre, the incredible run he's had since his return and winning the title at WrestleMania, et cetera, et cetera. Another name that was mentioned in those cuts a moment ago, though, Lance Hoyt, who at the time was wrestling under the name Vance Archer. Of course, these days he's Lance Archer on AEW. I got to tell you, man, it's really cool to look back 10 years ago and see big names like, Luke Gallows and Vance Archer. There is life after WWE. And, obviously no one would have ever predicted that there was going to be an AEW, but Gallows proved it, in New Japan and Impact. And I don't know. It's cool to think that your dream doesn't have to end just because it didn't work out with WWE.
Yeah, and there was a time period between about 2002 up until 2018, maybe 17, that there really wasn't a lot going on other than WWE. If you're talking about here in the States, it was a bit of a dry well, and a lot of people thought, well, God, if they're letting me go here, what am I going to do? And people just panicked. They didn't realize there was other places, and there was independents and places to go in Japan and get experience and, go out of the States to get some more seasoning, get notoriety and all the things that you could accomplish outside of WWE. The fact is, you're right. There's definitely life after WWE if you really want to be in this business. And the guys that survived, the Lance Hoyts and, Big Drew, Big Luke, those guys not only survived, they upped the ante.
No doubt about it. Somebody else who's looking to cash their chips in this era, Matt Hyson, who's 40. He's best known as Spike Dudley in ECW. He's going to retire after a 17-year career, and Meltzer would say Hyson was a classic overachiever who would have been considered too small to be a wrestler when he started training in California. It was to be a manager, but he was a good worker on the indies and got his big break from Paul Heyman in ECW in the late 90s. After ECW folded, he lasted until 2005 until he was cut by the WWE. He worked on occasion in TNA as Brother Runt because WWE claimed ownership of the Spike Dudley name. Spike Dudley is an unlikely success story in wrestling. You got to work with him a little bit in WWE. What did you think of Spike?
Oh, I love Spike Dudley. He, first of all, he was an intelligent guy, educated guy. And what you see is not what you talk to, And the guy he was a crash test dummy in the time when that was the only option that he could have had, because we were still on the 6'5", 280-pounder being the prototype for what a wrestler should be. But the fact that he could take so much abuse and get power bombed, off the top rope through a table out on the floor and actually survive it, the guy was tough as hell. And he just kept getting up. And it wasn't that he was an ass kicker or that he was a great wrestler. He was a guy that you just couldn't get him to stay down. And that was his claim to fame. That was his story. That was his gimmick, and there was a spot for a guy like that. And I always liked Spike, enjoyed talking to him. And I know that he probably is feeling all those bumps today as we speak. But that was his niche, and he did a great job with it.
He really did. The Philadelphia market has been synonymous with WWE, and the home for WWE from 74 to 96 was the Spectrum, and it's finally demolished on November 23rd, 2010 here. Meltzer would note the building had largely been obsolete since they built a more modern Core State Center right next door. Your favorite memories of running in the Spectrum? It feels like a building that's synonymous with pro wrestling.
Yeah. And it just had a different feel. It was older, you had a lot of history. Yet obviously the, hockey team had a lot of history there, and it was sometimes new and modern, and all that is awesome. It's the great next piece. But there are some of those arenas, like in Columbia, South Carolina, you have that building where we used to wrestle, and every seat all the way to the ceiling felt like it was right on top of the ring. The Spectrum had that flavor to it that you knew there had been some wars in that building. And it was just one of those places you walked in and you could almost hear the walls talking to you. And it was associated strictly with WWF, not WCW, who ran another building that was downtown there. And you got just used to, when you walked in the door, it was just familiar. And it was one of those buildings I wish they would have just left up, to be honest with you.
Sean Waltman took to Twitter here in 2010 to say that the WWE should have two brands, but not just one named Raw and one named SmackDown, but one aimed at intelligent adults and the other created specifically for children. I got to tell you, Arn, I kind of like that idea, having a family friendly. I mean, listen, when I grew up, I loved watching Saturday morning wrestling. It was always on, whether it was Superstars or Challenge or some of the syndicated shows from WCW. It was a big part of my weekend routine to watch wrestling. But then later, of course, when wrestling became more of a prime time weeknight affair, they started to push some of the boundaries with more risque content. And I was the right age group for it at that time. So I really liked that. But I understand there was heat, quote unquote, on, hey, should we let our kids watch this with the crotch chopping and middle fingers and drinking beer and bleeding and everybody yelling, suck it, and all the nonsense that was the Attitude Era? Certainly you shouldn't let your kids watch that. What do you think of this idea that there be a kids brand and an adult brand?
Well, I think in its thought process, we would love that. Problem is, are you going to use the same talent to cross over to both shows, to be characters on both shows? And that's where you run into the problem. You're either PG or you're not. You're either G or you're not. And I don't think you could cross pollinate the two. And the reality is, if you probably look at the stats, the big money is in the PG product because that's groups of guys. that's guys that come 4 and 5 and 6 together, and they're all buying T-shirts, and they're all buying beers, and they're all paying parking, and they're buying the merchandise, and they're the ones that come to the pay-per-views, and that's the ones you hear chanting. And then you look at the numbers of kids that we have, and if John Cena's not on the card, who is like the mayor of all children, or was, he was the guy that appealed to all the kids, and that was his fan base. What do those numbers look like? What do they stack up to be? And now you're talking a total production of a different total show. And I don't think anybody's ever going to look at wrestling. When you say professional wrestling, they're not going to look at that as being a G product for kids. It's just too firmly cemented in their mind what it is and what it should be. I don't know. I'm skeptical. Would it be nice if you could do it? Absolutely. Because, it's always made me proud when we put a product out there that you are proud to bring your 10-year-old to, and there's nothing that happens during the course of the night that he can't see. And when we cut some of the low road stuff out of the industry, people almost naked and innuendos on the language and all that stuff, and the blood and guts and too violent. I was glad to see that. So you could have, if somebody wanted to bring their children, they could bring them with no fear of anything going on. But, it's an interesting concept. Don't know if you can do it, but it's an interesting thought coming from Pac.
It is. I think, to your point, you wouldn't want to cross pollinate them, but let's imagine for a minute that if you did that sort of split, an adult version and a kid version, up until recently, you could have had Roman Reigns as, the star character on your kid version. But then you do one of these drafts, you shake it up, and boom, he shows up on the adult version. And now we see he's got more of an edge, and he's more of a bad guy. He can do a different style and, just change his character up a little bit. I think it feels Raw and SmackDown start to feel, I don't know, they have a sameness to them, not just because of the set design, but because it feels like, okay, he was on Monday, now he's on Fridays, but what else is different? But if they really had to change their character, now we have to, present ourselves in a different way because we're talking to a 32-year-old or a 12-year-old. I think that could be interesting. I don't think we'll see it, but I think it could be interesting, especially since it seems like these days when people talk about ratings more than ever, they're talking about the demo. And if you really want to get those folks to tune in, that coveted 18 to 49 males or whatever the number is, then perhaps going more adult with that program, that becomes a little easier, but you can still sell all of your, action figures and toys and lunch boxes and all that stuff to the kids. I don't know. It's fun to sort of armchair quarterback this stuff, isn't it?
Yeah. I would feel a lot better about it if it was the way it was during the infancy of the draft. Those first couple of drafts, when we split the product and there was a blue team, there was a red team. That talent took that serious. And I know the SmackDown crew, who had always been said were the B team, people they were very offended. The Fit Finleys and the Undertakers and the Bradshaws and all the guys that were on SmackDown, they were offended by being called. They thought, and justly so, in a lot of cases, they were the A team. And there was a strict competition. There was a strict rivalry between the two. And when you didn't cross the talent over, once you became SmackDown or Raw talent, you didn't see them on the other show. It truly was a brand split, And you felt that. And you couldn't see guys on Monday and see them on Friday too. It was, if it would have stuck with that and let that run its course before it became wishy-washy and, okay, we're going to have a draft. Oh, and everybody's going to be on their own separate brand except for talent A, B, C, and D. Then they can go to both. The moment that you say that, the draft means absolutely nothing.
Yeah.
And we kind of dumped in our own mess kit there. Even if you would have had one person that could float back and forth, it's not the same. When you got drafted, those first couple of drafts, and it became evident that, hey, you were leaving friends behind. Now you weren't going to cross paths with these guys, even though you worked for the same company. You would go a year and not see a guy because he had different routing. You were never in the same town the same time. And your friends, you had to make a whole new group of traveling partners and friends, and the angles had to be within that company. It was a real brand split, and it was I liked it. I thought it made for a lot of interesting chaos within each individual company.
One other thing that Waltman sends out here that I want your opinion on. He says the company should also drop their marijuana policy and steroid policy. At the time, the company is still punishing wrestlers for positive marijuana tests. And I think that occasionally it involves suspensions for like multiple offenses, but I think it's a $2,500 fine or something. I've never talked about this. Do you think the company needs a marijuana or steroid policy?
No. Number one, if you're going to use steroids, use them under a doctor's care and use them, if you're healing injuries and all those type things. That's what they're there for. That's what they're manufactured for, and if you allow the talent to use them the right way, you won't have the abuse because nobody will be sneaking behind anybody's back trying to do something that's not within the company policy. The pot thing is a joke. You can walk in how many states today and just walk in and buy it. Walk out the door. It's perfectly legal, right?
Right.
To have a policy that's against something that would be like saying, okay, don't go in and buy a bottle of Jack Daniels. We're going to have to fine you for that. Guys have to have an escape in this business. To travel, the beating your body up, the being away from home, the trying to get into your hotel room and wanting to call your wife and talk to your kids, and it's the middle of the night. You can't wake them up because it's school night. There's so many different things that go through a guy's mind when he's on the road 250 days a year. His body's beat up. He's tired. He just wants to get some rest. If a guy wants to, smoke a perfectly legal substance in today's world, certainly don't turn around and charge him $2,500 a pop for doing it. You're saying, we're not going to fire you. We're not going to suspend you, but here's the punishment. Like that somehow makes it right. Hell, let the guys have their pot. Let a guy have a cocktail if that's what he chooses to do on his own time. Now it's up to the individual to not get popped in those states where it's not legal, where it's still a crime. If you're foolish enough to not govern yourself and watch after yourself and not get in trouble over it, and because there's still people in this world that believe that pot is a drug, and that there's a lot of negative vibes that go with that. People haven't, they don't have their thinking up to snuff, I would say, because it's a new world. Marijuana is recognized as doing a lot of good for a lot of people, and it should just be something that's accepted as long as you don't get yourself in a sling over it.
Well, I think you just made a lot of our listeners pretty happy. Let's talk about something else in this era that is going to get some people talking. The return of Tough Enough on the USA Network as a reality show is now official. The Observer would report that in November. As a concept, did you like Tough Enough, or did you think it was a monumental waste of time?
No, I liked it. I liked seeing people come into our world and our environment that were good athletes in other worlds and other environments and test their mettle against what they thought professional wrestling was, because it's a real eye opener when you step through those ropes and you're looking on the inside out versus on the outside looking in, got a completely different look. And it has a completely different feel, as most of them will tell you.
Let's talk a little bit about Vince McMahon. In this era, of course, he's still running the show, but because it is a corporate entity, he has to have a contract to be chairman and CEO. So he signs a new one, a 3-year deal with his own company. But hey, that's the way the corporate structure works here in America. He's going to have the official title of creative director, as well as a writer for the company and a performer. He gets a base salary of 1.1 million per year. Of course, he has incentive-based bonuses on the company reaching a certain level of profitability. If the company hits those goals, he gets an annual bonus of 1.1 million. There's lots of fun stuff in here, but my favorite is, quote, he also gets 4 weeks of paid vacation per year. Arn, have you ever heard of Vince McMahon taking any vacation, much less 4 in a year?
He has now accrued 411 years of vacation time.
The idea that he's gonna, goddamn, Linda, let's get down to Turks and Caicos. I just don't see it. It's just, he wakes up thinking about this business. He goes to sleep thinking of it. He gets up to pee. He came up with an angle while he's in there and texted Bruce about it, right? There's no chance he's taking 4 weeks vacation.
I'd love to see somebody walk in the office not knowing, like on a TV day on Monday, and tell Vince they'd like to talk to him about some days off. Can you imagine the nuclear blast that would come out of that room?
Yeah, it's unbelievable.
Yeah, I mean, this is what he does 24/7. It's what he thinks about 24/7. I doubt, other than the time that he's in the gym, which is every day, I would bet, at least probably 5 to 6 days a week anyway. You know, that's probably his only, you would think, release, but I'm sure he's thinking about the business every minute that he's working out. So 24/7.
Well, he is 24/7, but believe it or not, he didn't go to England for TV in this era. The Observer would note that this was Triple H's first time basically being in charge in his new role as Vince's top advisor. Meltzer would say the only thing we heard is things were very different, but that was said to them in a positive manner. Is this the first time you remember 10 years ago that Vince occasionally says, okay, I'm not going to go. Hunter, you just take care of it?
Yeah, and I always believed and still believe there was a business reason for him not going, because it's not like he's flying coach on Pan Am.
Right.
You know what I mean?
Right.
He's on that beautiful jet of his. It's got the big captain's chairs that lay all the way back and the big shrimps, probably some Cavassier and all kind of various wines that are very expensive. Don't know what he drinks, but just guessing. And I'm sure the trip over and the trip back is the least of his trouble. So it's not a travel issue. It's not an issue was going through customs and all that pain in the ass stuff you have to go through when you go there. If he didn't go, there was a business reason, something he had to be there for. I guarantee it.
Let's talk about Survivor Series. We're finally here. The show gets 35% thumbs up, 32% thumbs down, 32% thumbs in the middle. People are really split. There's a dark match, or I guess a pre-show match. It's R-Truth, pinning Zack Ryder. Then we can start the actual show. We've got Daniel Bryan retaining his United States Championship, beating Ted DiBiase in 9:55. Meltzer liked it, gave it 3.5 stars. Bryan wins clean with the LaBelle lock, and Meltzer would call it a very good start of the show. How'd you like the match, and what did you think of the heat that Matt Stryker was receiving? I guess a lot of folks in this era started to really pick on his commentary.
Well, he had his own style, and he liked what he liked, and he tried to be voicing himself as almost as the counter to Michael Cole, who is the heel announcer, and was dumping on all the baby faces. I think Matt thought he might take up the fight for the baby faces, and maybe it came across that way. Maybe he was reaching too hard. You know, I never paid enough attention to the commentary because I was doing so many other things and I was always between one place and another. I wished I'd have had time to sit down and watch a show and listen to the commentary, but I didn't really. Um, I know that when I look back and I watched, several matches on this show, the guys, they were some young, good-looking baby faces and heels. Ted DiBiase, I wish to this day that him and Randy and Cody could have been left together for just say 2 years and let that run its course, because coming out of the chute, those three looked as good as anybody we've ever put together. They looked like three stars, and they all learned from each other and they all benefited from each other. And when you split one of them off, you split the two off from Randy, it took on a different flavor, and it wasn't quite there yet, so it didn't stick. Then when you split, Cody and Teddy up, they weren't ready to be split up either. They could have still learned from each other and been a great team, I thought. The sum of the parts, to me, when you broke it up, was not as valuable as the three of them together, and I just wish they could have ran their course. And watching this match with Daniel Bryan, who you just knew, or I knew, if they would just continue to let him do what he does, they don't have to push him, shove him, put a bunch of laurels around him. Just let that kid go wrestle. And that's what he was able to do with Teddy, and they tore the joint down. That match was incredible.
I can't help but wonder what Ted would be doing if he were in wrestling now. Do you think when it came down to it, his heart just wasn't in it? Had he just gotten burned out on the travel and the WWE grind? I mean, WWE, everybody knows this, perhaps nobody better than you. It can wear you down. And I just feel like, he maybe would have enjoyed today's climate, maybe.
When you've been to the pinnacle and you've been with Randy and Cody and that group, and you were working with the top baby faces and you were enjoying the business at a top level, and the writers were having to write decent stuff for you because you were the top heels. Once you experience that, you can't go back to just coming to TV every week and they may or may not use you. One thing's for sure, they have no big plans for you, and they're not going to be writing a bunch of creative stuff for you. And I saw Teddy just get farther and farther down that list and taken for granted, and people would look at him like, okay, well, it's over. You can look at this match and just no buys, just put it on face value. You can even cut the sound off and just watch the quality of the work. And him and Daniel Bryan went out there and tore it up. Who knows how good Teddy could have been if they would have just stayed the course. So many things have gotten broken up, so many angles, and guys that were partners and got split off, and things got, before they got too hot, they would get cooled off. And the main reason for that is company don't want guys having too much power. They don't want to get too hot, because if they get too hot, then they may have an opinion. And if they have an opinion, they may say, well, I don't think this is right. And once you go there and once you start asking all those questions, a lot of people in a room don't like to have that aggravation, if you know what I mean.
Let's talk about the next match. I guess first we should mention there's a segment with Miz and Alex Riley. They come out. Miz is cutting a promo comparing the Miami Heat with Nexus, saying they're both overrated, despised by most people in the league, and hopelessly mediocre. He compares LeBron James to Wade Barrett. He pushed that he's from Cleveland, where James played, and said he was a traitor for leaving the city, and said LeBron would never be a champion with the Heat. And he says he's tired of carrying the briefcase around and he's ready to cash it in. Then we get John Morrison pinning Sheamus.
Hey, Kim, before we go any further.
Yeah.
One thing we might've skipped over is you had the clean win with Daniel Bryan, who had to really, really work for the LaBelle lock. And
right.
On his exit, Miz came out with Riley and blasted him with that briefcase. So he got a little extra heat there. Daniel Bryan has had a great match, a great win, got blasted by the briefcase. Then they went into their promo, which, this was the incarnation of when they were starting to build Miz. So just to catch everybody up, this was the infancy stage where he was going to get his big shove.
And it's a cool look back at what's now become a more legendary feud in WWE, Daniel Bryan and Miz. I mean, it feels like those guys have been attached at the hip. John Morrison here pinned Sheamus in 11-11. Meltzer would say it was another good match. He gave it 3.25 stars. The finish saw Sheamus try for his Razor's Edge, but Morrison gets out. Sheamus comes in with another brogue kick, but Morrison sidesteps it, hits a flying kick, followed by the Shining Wizard for the pin. And Stryker would have been the only one of the announcers who would have literally known the move, but he chose to stay out of it. They pushed in commentary the idea of the bully getting his. That, according to the Observer. What did you think here? Two very capable performers, and it feels like two really good matches to start the show.
Yeah, and Sheamus was a bully at that point, and very rugged with his work. John Morrison, I guarantee you to this day, is not afraid of probably a lot. And you could tell, I mean, they're in there mixing it up pretty good. There's some pretty stiff shots. Morrison never backed off. And that guy is such an incredible athlete. If you could see him do that parkour stuff, I believe it's called, it's just incredible. And athletically, he's just very gifted. And he's just a tough son of a gun. I bet you he'd be a handful outside the back door of a bar somewhere if you gave him too much crap. And he had, you look at him on TV now, he has aged incredibly. He looks exactly the same. So he's one of those rare, unique guys that is very, very durable and can take a lot of punishment and dish out a lot of punishment. And you saw that in this match.
Let's talk about the next little backstage skit here. We see R-Truth tell John Cena, "Hey, I've got a solution for your problem. Nexus is banned from ringside, but I'm not. I'll come down and do something to Randy Orton, and then you can count Orton's shoulders down. That way you get to keep your job, but be out of Nexus, and you're guilt-free because I caused the disturbance." And Cena is upset at this and says he couldn't live with himself if he did that. He doesn't want to disrespect the legends of wrestling that he grew up idolizing by helping Barrett get the title. He's going to call it down the middle, and Truth seems frustrated with that, but we're at least doing a little bit of storytelling in the middle of the pay-per-view. These segments feel a little bit like a Raw rather than a pay-per-view, but I like it because it is sort of checking the boxes of all the probable outcomes of the main event. And we keep the show going next with Dolph Ziggler and Caval. I got to tell you, I was a big fan of Low Key. He was first on my radar back in 2002, I guess. And I just assumed this guy was going to be one of the next big stars in wrestling. And for whatever reason, it didn't work out. But it does seem a little weird to go back in time and watch him wrestle Dolph Ziggler 10 years ago. Dolph picks up the win in 9 minutes and 31 seconds, so he retains his Intercontinental title. Caval dedicated the match to the Roughhouse Rider Nation, and of course, then he lost. He's going to talk about his cousin Steve and his best friend Nelson, and that's referring, at least in code, to independent wrestling legend Homicide, who I guess had a run with Impact as well. I like this. I thought it was a fun match. I've always felt like Low Key could have did a little more. I think the rap on him was he just wasn't always easy to do business with, but I don't know. I never worked with him. The crowd wasn't all the way into it, but there is a fun finish here. There's a cool spot where Caval's thrown in the air, but lands on the top rope and comes off with an enziguri for a near fall. It ends with a cradle by Caval being reversed by Ziggler, who's also holding the tights. Another 3.25 star match. We've had 3 really good back-to-back matches. What'd you think of this one?
Yeah, I liked it. I thought Caval had almost an evil look to him.
Yeah.
If you just looked at his eyes and his facial expression and the way he moved, it's almost an evil thing. I didn't ever look at him as being a baby face.
Right.
And I think that's probably part of the reason, you've got Dolph out there with Vicky, who had a ton of heat. The moment she started screeching, the place went berserk. Dolph was on the way up. He had already gotten to a stage with his work that he could go out and tear the joint down with everybody. Didn't matter who. And, you had these young guys out there, but there really wasn't a baby face in the match. And if you watch the match back and watch the crowd, they were watching and they were respectful, but they really weren't into it to the degree they wanted to see somebody with heat get their ass kicked. I didn't get that feel for that. It felt almost like a very well done generic match. Nothing really at stake. But the performance I thought was very, very good on both their parts.
Why do you think low-key didn't work out here for the company?
I really don't know. And you never know what happens when you negotiate with writers and your boss in that company, because when a talent would go in and talk about creative, producers weren't involved in that conversation. And I made it a habit, unless it was somebody that asked my opinion, to not pry. That was their personal business. But a lot of guys could walk in to that office where all creative was located. And if you were iffy or on the bubble, if you said something the wrong way or said the wrong thing, you might walk out of that room being on your downside on the way back. I did hear rumblings about him voicing his opinion, and strongly sometimes. Don't know if it's true or not. I certainly understand that. And in some cases, certainly respect it. I know that if you don't speak up and you're right, and you're definitely all right, then you're doing a disservice to yourself and the company. So I don't know why his push wasn't longer or bigger. Not sure.
Well, it's a shame. I still think he had an upside. And by the way, he's still young. He's only 41 years old. So he's still got some gas in the tank. Next up, we see that Swagger is mad that the SmackDown team in the match, he didn't think it should be Del Rio's team. He thinks it should be his team, which he wants to call Team Swagger's All American. Swagger said this show wasn't taking place in the US, but in Little Cuba. So trying to get a little heat here for Miami. And next up, it's Team Mysterio, which is Rey Mysterio and Big Show and Kofi Kingston and MVP and Chris Masters taking on Team Del Rio, which is Alberto, Cody Rhodes, Ted DiBiase, Tyler Rex, and Jack Swagger. A traditional Survivor Series elimination tag here. Of course, Team Mysterio wins in 18 minutes and 12 seconds. Meltzer would note that MVP got a big hometown pop, but that nobody knew Rex. And he says the heel team here is the best groomed team in Survivor Series history. And Cole claimed the Survivor Series, the event itself, made stars out of The Rock, Randy Orton, and The Miz. I thought it was, pretty fun to have an old school elimination style match. This is what I grew up on with Survivor Series. Meltzer says the negative here is that no new stars were allowed to look good and that there were no upsets, giving new pushes in the eliminations, but he liked the match and that he gave it 3.25 stars. The streak continues. Another pretty good match. What'd you think?
Well, if nobody knew Rex, wouldn't that have been a good chance for him to upset somebody?
Yes, sir.
That's what made these top matches fun for me, because you could take a guy that wasn't well known, put him on that particular team. And it always felt like, to me, Survivor Series was one of those deals where they were almost brand exclusive. It was almost like two teams that were going after each other. Even if it was all heels and all baby faces, it just felt like there was a bond of some sort on each team, and it made it more competitive. And you could take a guy like Tyler Rex and had him upset somebody. It would, they would have known who he was the next day if you would have continued on with it. Having young guys in this match was a launching pad, I felt like, to put them in a much more favorable role. And I agreed with that 100%. And plus, those kids can go. Give them a vehicle to go out and show you what they got.
It's interesting to look at the crew again, too. Mysterio still there. Big Show still there. Kofi Kingston still there. MVP still there. Chris Masters isn't. On the other side, nobody is. Alberto Del Rio, Cody Rhodes, Ted DiBiase, Tyler, and Jack Swagger, not a one. And it's interesting, I guess, that Ted DiBiase's out here doing double duty. I don't know that that's been talked about enough here, but it feels like the company has a lot of faith and confidence in him. And I don't know. It's just fun to look back in 10 years and see sort of where they are now. Of course, we know Cody and Swagger are now across the board, over with, AEW, but everybody else still sort of figuring things out.
I think Teddy probably falls in that category of we don't need you till we need you.
Yeah.
And then we need you twice. You just brought up something that probably would have gotten washed right under the bridge. It's an amazing fact because I know he was on his way down the totem pole when this occurred. And he went out and tore it down with Daniel Bryan, and then they thought enough of his work to put him on the team for the Survivor Series match too. There's some antiquated thinking there somewhere. There's somebody has got their wires crossed. Is he good enough or isn't he? It's very interesting.
Let's talk about the next match. We get Natalya winning the Divas title in a handicap match over the co-champions Michelle McCool and Layla. Meltzer would say this was a nothing match, but still better than most women's matches because there's no blown spots or awkward bad wrestling. He says Laycool made fun of Natalya acting like she had a beard like Jim Neidhart. Layla got no local star pop at all, but I don't think they've pushed that she's from Miami on television. Natalya suplexed both at the same time. The spot didn't get nearly the reaction it usually gets. Natalya with a sharpshooter out of nowhere. And then after the match, McCool and Layla attack her until Beth Phoenix music plays and she runs in for the save, giving Layla the glam slam. Phoenix puts Natalya on her shoulders and carries her around the ring while she held the belt. You can tell by Natalya almost breaking down upon getting the belt that winning the title meant something to her. So me and you are big fans of Natalya. It's really cool to see her win the title here. And I think we've talked about this before. I hated this co-champion shit with Michelle McCool and Layla. It's not like it's their fault. It's creative, but seeing Natalya win the title, that made it worth it. What'd you think?
Yeah, I loved it. Natty worked hard. She worked as hard as any one of the guys. And, she had a good business head growing up in the business, and her thought process was different, and it was way advanced from a lot of the ladies that came into the industry that were hired in as eye candy. And, if they had any aptitude, they were allowed to, to wrestle and get better and all those things. But Natty was one of those that was there for whatever you needed. And Beth Phoenix was my freaking hero. It's pretty well known that, amongst the people in the business, Beth was just one that I looked at and she had it from day one. She absolutely got it. And when you had an ass kicker and you had a muscle head like Beth was, and she knew how to bring that character to life, it's like she was like a monster female. I saw Mickey James jump off the top countless nights with a crossbody off the top rope, and Beth would catch her and not move an inch, not wobble, not have a stagger step, nothing. It was like, whoop, it was like a superhuman feat of strength. And she could just do some incredible stuff. And what a team they became. And they looked good together. They worked good together. They loved the business. And, I was proud to have Natty have her moment that night. And I was glad Beth got to be a part of it.
Let's talk a little bit more about Natty for a minute, because I've never really understood. I mean, I just think about her career and think about how important she's been to the women's division. And this is her only Divas title win. And she wouldn't win another belt with the company until, I think August of 2017 is when she became the SmackDown Women's Champ. So you're saying nearly 7 years later before she wins another. Does Vince just Does he not like her work? Does he not like her look? Does he not like her gimmick? Does he not like her heritage being a heart? I mean, it feels like she checks every box you would want. I mean, based on what we see from the outside, model employee, has a good look, gear looks great, work is some of the best in the entire company, probably the most consistent for years and years and years. I mean, this is an era where there were a lot of, quote unquote models who learned to wrestle. Natty was a wrestler. And so when the women's division became about the evolution and no, we wrestle now, I'm looking at Natty like she wrestled the whole time. What was it about her presentation, or what did she not have that Vince thought, we got to go with her? It almost feels like a consolation prize for her to only have 2 title runs.
You want to run down that list of employee isms that she had? Look good, always on time, never gave you any trouble, dependable, all those positives. I know exactly why she didn't get a push, don't you? Isn't it obvious?
No.
She had all those attributes. She was easy to do business with, all those things. You've heard the squeaky wheel gets the grease.
So she needs to be a shit disturber.
Yeah, that's probably what she was missing. She should have had an issue with everything that came out of creative if you really wanted to get a push. She was so easy to do business with. She worked so hard to give you what you wanted. She was always on time. She was always there. Her gear looked good. You name it. And at that particular point in time, her work really stood out because the ladies hadn't flamed up yet.
Right.
We were still on that teeter-tottering. It was fixing to go to another level, but it hadn't quite flamed up. She had already flamed up. Her work was immaculate from day one.
So hypothetically, if she developed a substance problem or got in a fight backstage or no-showed some events or slapped Vince McMahon or cussed out a producer, maybe she'd have got a bigger push, but because she did none of that, she's just there.
Well, she couldn't have done any worse.
No, that's what I'm saying. Like, I just don't get it. Like, it feels like to me, we should be talking about Natty Neidhart as being like, I don't know. It's weird too, to see that when the women's wrestling in WWE got serious, it's almost like she got leapfrogged. Nope. Now it's about Charlotte and it's about Becky and it's about Bayley and it's about Sasha. And don't get me wrong, those are all really fantastic performers, but I don't know that they gave Natty a fair shake to really, I don't know, her time in the sun. She's almost like, in a weird way, she's like the female version of Kofi Kingston. Dude did everything you wanted, blah, blah, blah. And okay, we gave him his little run and now, all right, keep doing what you were doing before. It's just weird to me.
Well, before you get too upset, and I could tell your ass is a little chapped right now, Natty has been there for a long time and made a lot of money without having to be the number one female. And there's something to be said, trust me, I know, that if you're in that upper middle and you're a top performer, but you're not always booked on top, but you can be there for a long time and always in a good spot and always on the live events and always on your pay-per-views, you can have a huge career that just kind of floats underneath the wire. You're there and they know you're there, but you're not constantly in the spotlight where you're having to get that number or you're having to get that quarter hour or you're having to draw that house. You're the one they looked at, well, who was on top? There's also something to be said for floating along in that spot and just being there 20 years. At the end of 20 years, you got a pretty hefty bank account.
Listen, I'm not arguing that at all. I totally get what you're saying, that at the end of the day, this is a business, and having consistent, reliable income and, being able to enjoy your work and not have a ton of stress or pressure, your quality of life could be great. I get that. But I also kind of think, and maybe I'm wrong, but listen, I never did it. You did. Chat me up here. Doesn't everybody, when they get into this business, sort of think about, oh, I'm going to headline WrestleMania, or I want to be the top dog? I mean, as a little kid, at least when you're first starting, you have these big aspirations, and somewhere along the way, I'm sure eventually for everybody in every industry, it becomes more of a job and less of a childhood fantasy. But it does make me wonder, like, do you think part of her wishes maybe she would have, hey, you know what? Maybe I need to go away and come back, because we've seen sometimes when you do, get out of the race car, and Jericho was famous for this. He would come in, do his thing, have fun, and then go away for a while and come back. It kept him fresh and it kept him in the mix. Do you think if she would have done that and done something with Impact or done something in Japan or done something with AEW, that she could get that big spot when she came back, or maybe not so much?
Maybe, but I don't think the opportunities for women were the same as for men.
Right.
I think someone like Jericho would have more options than Natty would have, and there's something about being comfortable, and there's something, she got the Diva show and all these extras that go, there's a lot of trappings that surround not just being the champion. And your question was, when you get in this business, yeah, if you get in this industry and you don't aspire to be the top guy and you don't want to be the champion, then something's the matter with you. Nobody comes in this business or should come in this business and go, yeah, I just want to be that guy that's first after intermission. That's my aspirations. That's where I want to be. Then you're in the wrong business. But there also comes a time that you're going to realize, for most of us, that you are going to be that guy that's first or second after intermission, because you're either not marketable enough, your body doesn't look good enough, your talking is not good enough, or your work is not good enough, or you just don't have that star quality that could stand alone in the main event of an event, no matter whether it's a pay-per-view or live event or a regular TV or whatever it is. Once you figure out that golden circle is a very small one, and you realize there's a lot of slots on the card other than that one, then you're a lot better off. And you can be a big star without having to be the world champion. You go and, a lot of times, it pops up on the internet, who is the greatest wrestler that was never the world champion? And that's a pretty prominent list. It's a lot more prominent than you would think. Go look at it sometime. And it just tells you that if you get over, the championship being put on you is not going to make you get over even more. You put your most over guy, that's who you put the title on, not the other way around. The title doesn't make the man makes the title. Same thing applies to the ladies. And I think Natty is, she's one of our favorites. She's worked her ass off. She's always given you everything you've ever asked. And as an entertainer, she's given you, as a consumer, everything that you wanted to see. And she's still there. So that's all that should matter.
Let's talk about the next match. It's Kane retaining the world title, going to a double pin draw with Edge in 12 minutes and 47 seconds. Edge comes out with an empty wheelchair. Kane's going crazy. And basically the idea was that Edge, the babyface, was going to beat Kane by outsmarting him because he couldn't beat him physically. Meltzer called it a dull match and gave it a 1.5 stars. He thought the match had little heat. The ref counts 3 on both of them. It's announced that Edge had won the title, but then the ref explains that both had their shoulders down and the match was a tie. So he gives the belt to Kane. Then Edge attacks Kane after, knocking him into the wheelchair, and runs the wheelchair into a gimmicked part of the barricade that Kane goes through. Lots of gaga, as Pat Patterson would say, but it feels like our streak of good matches is grinding down a little bit here, which would have been hard for me to imagine. It seems like these two guys were going to tear it up. Is it just have an off night, bad chemistry that night, fans weren't into it? Or is it just one of those deals where they never really got going? What do you think?
Maybe it was a rotten finish.
Okay.
If you have a double pin, number one, the match, someone's got to come down and go, no, both guys' shoulders were down, match continues. You have to have a winner. It doesn't end in a tie. You got a double pin. You have to continue the match because you haven't determined anything. If both guys' shoulders are down, no one won. That's the big mistake, and everything else was a mad scramble to try to kick dirt over that. That's what it sounds like to me. I don't remember this match, and there's probably a reason I don't remember it. But I could tell you that the rule of law is when you have a double pin, referee has to realize, wait a minute, both guys' shoulders were down. We got to continue this match. Period. And if you give them anything else, you've just choked the life out of the audience, and that's probably what happened. Those two as performers should have torn the joint down. Yes, for sure.
We should mention we've got another match that I think was originally supposed to be, I think what Bruce would call a let me up match. This is usually the death spot after a big hot match. Unfortunately, Kane and Edge perhaps looked hotter on paper than it was in actuality. We've got Heath Slater teaming with Justin Gabriel. They're going to retain the tag titles, beating Santino Marella and Vladimir Kozlov. It goes 5 minutes and 8 seconds. Meltzer didn't love it, and he gives it 3/4 of a star. He does note that the crowd was super into Santino, and he says the match got good reactions, even though it was supposed to be the death spot. The finish sees Marella get a hot tag as they use Kozlov to sell. He goes for the Cobra, but David Otunga and Michael McGillicuddy jump on the apron. Marella was distracted. Slater uses the necktie for the pin. And that's all she wrote. Santino was over in this era as a comedy gimmick. We don't see Kozlov anymore. Heath Slater, we know he's got kids and he's doing a great job now with Impact. Justin Gabriel is a name we don't hear about very much anymore either. What'd you think of these performers or the match?
Well, Justin's still floating around. I've seen him on Ring of Honor, and performing in empty arenas like we all have to do. And it's very difficult. He's still got something left. That's for sure. Slater, I'm a fan of his. He suffered a pretty bad injury, a few weeks back.
Oh yeah. He had a groin thing, maybe a hernia thing or something like that on pay-per-view.
Both.
Yeah.
Yeah. He got both. So surgery warranted. He's going to be on the way back, and hey, if there's a good time to be out, hurt,
now's the time. Yeah.
It's probably now. It's not a lot you're missing, if you have to be, if it's in the cards for you. But yeah, I mean, all those guys were great performers, and Kozlov, who was a monster Sambo champion, which doesn't necessarily translate as being what we do. And, he nice guy, thank God, killer, probably legitimate killer. But Santino was a star of that whole show, and, just very entertaining. He had such a grasp of that character, and the audience really enjoyed him.
Real quick, want to correct myself. You're exactly right. Justin Gabriel is PJ Black now. You caught me twice today, Arn. Momentary lapses. But PJ Black, you can see tearing it up on Ring of Honor. Very talented performer. And when I see the name, just went blank. Didn't realize the same guy. Let's get to our main.
He's hiding behind another gimmick.
Yeah. Well, you know what? PJ Black is a kind of a cooler name than Justin Gabriel, at least in my opinion.
Yeah, you're right.
All right, here we go. Randy Orton's going to pin Wade Barrett to retain the WWE title. John Cena is your special guest referee. We've got 15 minutes and 14 seconds for a runtime, 2.5 stars. It's okay. It's heavy on storyline for me. Eventually, he being Barrett is going to start yelling at Cena, and Cena's going to tell him, nope, I'm calling it straight. He shoves Cena. Cena shoves him right into an RKO, and Orton gets the pin. Stryker's acting like this is a big win for Cena because he gets out of Nexus, and Cole had to remind everyone, nope, Cena is fired. And then Nexus hits the ring after Cena and Orton, but the two clean house, and Cena grabs the belt, hands it to Orton, and they hug. Cena takes off his wristbands, places them in the middle of the ring like the amateurs taking off their boots and leaving them in the center. There was a Cena chant, but you could tell the crowd didn't buy that Cena was really leaving, nor should they have. Cena hugged Michael Cole as well as Rick, the sign guy from Texas, who's in the front row all the time, as well as a few others, and then walks away. Fans did react to his standing on the stage and saluting the audience, but not nearly at the level you'd hope for. And then he goes into the crowd as the show ends. 2.5 stars. kind of a unique way to end a pay-per-view where you feel like, hey, our most over guy, this is it. He's done. It's his farewell. But fans are smart here in 2010. They know this isn't it. What'd you think of this?
Well, you know why? Because they didn't leave him off a month, fired,
Right.
and let those guys run rampant. You know, it should have been one of those deals. Him and Randy beating all those guys up didn't serve a purpose. You wanted to go with a story that if Cena didn't do what Wade Barrett wanted, he was going to get canned. So, you know, after Cena, and I get doing the right thing, that would have appealed to all of his kids. If you're a parent, you could have explained, hey, he did the right thing. Sometimes you got to do the right thing in this life, and it's going to cost you. There's a life lesson there if the parents chose to go that route. But I would have damn sure not gotten to the Nexus and beat him up. You could have had those guys come down and browbeat him all the way out of the building with no help coming from anywhere. And he's got this gang of guys telling him to get his ass out of here. You're gone, da-da-da-da. And let him stay gone and let them benefit for the next month of him being fired. We don't lengthen stories enough. We don't put enough meat in the story. You know, that would have been easy. You could have put layer upon layer upon layer. The guy did the wrong thing, and it did. It got him fired. Well, shit, after week 3, you don't think people would have been saying, shit, I guess they did fire him. You could go back and Monday morning quarterback a lot of stuff and saw that would have been an easy fix.
Meltzer would write in the era, Cena won't even be selling the firing for a week. He's already been announced for the November 29th 3-hour Raw with the angle he's buying a ticket to sit at ringside. On the Raw television show and all the markets where Raw house shows were upcoming, even though fired, John Cena is listed as being in every main event. And the current plan is for Cena to work all the house shows and the upcoming TVs under a mask as Juan Cena, John's Mexican cousin. This is real.
Real shitty. I was there.
Juan Cena. Of course, the next night, John Cena comes out on Raw and thanks the WWE Universe. He's given an ovation by other wrestlers backstage as he exits the arena. Barrett's going to taunt him on the way out. He's going to demand a rematch against Randy Orton. During the match, John Cena attacks Barrett, costing him the match, but immediately afterwards, Miz cashes in his Money in the Bank briefcase and becomes the WWE champion, which is pretty remarkable. You know, it's supposed to be Barrett's time, but nope, we're switching gears. Now it's the Miz, and here comes Juan Cena. This feels like a fucking fever dream.
Full handoff to the Miz.
Full handoff. Listen, this was fun to go back and revisit. I kind of think in hindsight, this was a pretty good pay-per-view. I don't know why it had such a mixed bag, but there was a lot of good wrestling to start this show. Some pretty monumental moments too, where you think, okay, well, I guess this is the end of John Cena's career. They tried for the big spectacle of sending Kane through the barricade. You see Layla win her first title. There's some cool stuff on here. I enjoyed watching it back for the first time in 10 years.
Yeah, and as always, I commend the talent for working their ass off. There was never a night that I came back and got in my rental car and started down the road where I went, man, those guys loafed today. They dialed the shit in. There may have been some honest mistakes and some mechanical mistakes and some mistakes in storytelling and maybe a few things that I would have changed during the match, but I never looked back through that curtain and went, God, those guys loafed tonight. They worked their ass off. That's one thing for sure. And it's always been that way.
Well, I'm really excited that we're working our ass off here at adfreeshows.com. Arn, I haven't asked you. I've been specifically waiting. It's been announced now. Jim Herd. It's a 4K interview on adfreeshows.com. I think by the time everyone hears this, they've probably had a chance to watch it. I know that you haven't yet seen it, and I'm curious, are you going to abstain from watching it? Where are you at on Jim Herd in 2020?
Oh no, I'm not going to abstain. I'm going to listen. There's a different me sitting in this chair right now than there was sitting across from him in 88,
89.
89, excuse me, 89. And I'm going to, as usual, just like we don't rehearse this show, you just throw questions at me and I try to answer them off the top of my head. I'm going to go into this without any forewarning from you, if that's okay.
Sure.
And I just want to listen to it with my ears and look at it with my eyes and make my own determination, because the reality is you could take anybody. You could take even the guys that are on your staff, the Tonys, the Eric, all the guys, Bruce, myself, JR. You can ask us all in quiet in a cubicle the same question from an era that's at least 10 years old. You're probably going to have 5 different answers because you have 5 recollections. I'm going to be interesting to see what his recollection is.
Well, find out right now over at adfreeshows.com. As a reminder, you get all these shows early and ad free, including next week's hashtag Ask Arn Anything. And Arn and I are going to put a bow on this month with a special little bonus edition. We're going to talk about Starrcade 1987. We are going to do a little watch along with that. It's going to be fun. And of course, as you know, Starrcade is a Thanksgiving tradition. So look for it the last week of November. A lot of us are going to have to do a little travel or a little more cooking, or we're going to be a little more thirsty for content, for escape, for something to do. Well, how about enjoying Starrcade 87 with Arn Anderson and myself? And you might remember this Starrcade 87 show was the one where you were expecting a monster payoff from Jim Crockett Promotions that didn't quite materialize and ultimately would be something that would head you towards Vince McMahon not too many moons after, huh?
Yep. And as far as that thirst thing you're talking about, in your case, that'd be Jack Daniels.
Crown Royal. Thank you, sir.
Oh, you're a Crown man. Just over the rocks, or
no,
little mixer.
I actually mostly prefer Tito's and water, but I'll do Crown Reserve and Diet and make it tall, because I'm going to consume a lot of liquid.
Yeah. And it makes for less trips, right?
Absolutely. It does. And I get one of those big Yeti cups and fire up some old wrestling and watch with you. That sounds like a fun time. You should join us over at adfreeshows.com. Until next time, he is at the Arn Show. I am at Hey, it's Conrad, and we are out of time. We'll see you next week right here for another hashtag Ask Arn Anything. It's Arn.
Hey, it's Conrad Thompson. Thanks for checking out the podcast here on YouTube. Be sure to hit the subscribe button and the notifications bell so you get a notice anytime we upload some new content. And go save yourself some money right now. If you're in a 30-year loan or you have credit card debt, it's not a matter of if I can save you money. It's a matter of how much. Find out right now for free at SaveWithConrad.com.